Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Warcraft Weekly, Soul's wondrous wisdom show. No, there is no wisdom to be had here, but it is wondrous. Thanks to our supporters, the Brutosaur party over on Twitch, and the patrons, including newcomers like Jerry, and Eric, and Michael, and Tazama. Thank you all so much, but as for the rest of you, you're awesome too. So make sure that TP roll is filled because, you know when you sit, you get yourself ready and then you realize that it's empty. That's like the worst, right? Let's get to the news, starting with something appropriate. A draft version of the opening screen for Shadowlands. See that? Okay, fine, here's the big version. Check this out, wow. It's only slightly weird that we're looking at a window into one part of the Shadowlands and we're just in front of Icecrown Citadel, but details, you know? Seeing this makes the hype feel so much more than hype. This is real. The stronghold is before us. The broken sky, the glimpse of Torghast, and the home of the jailer. And wait, oh no. No, is that really going to be part of the opening? Oh, no, not a Brutosaur ghost too. Come on. This screen has been data mined, so don't consider this to be the final one, but it's probably pretty close. Minus Sylvanas. Well, maybe the Brutosaur can stay, sure. Torghast received some pretty meaty updates this week, this time opening up testing of 3 extra events to spice up the typical zany Torghast gameplay. The first is the Chorus of Dead Souls. It's where you can shift into an elite mob from Torghast that has some ridiculous abilities and anima powers that you can collect to make it even more powerful. I haven't been able to test this very much, but it appears that other players can jump into you, sort of like a vehicle, and also use extra abilities, which will turn this mob into this crazy hovering mod tank turret thing. It was just a lot of fun to play with though. Next is Unbridled Darkness. You basically get an extra action button that you can press every 1.5 minutes that will make your entire screen go black. Except for the minimap, you filthy screen looker you, but you are basically blind. However, you also get super powerful buffs that, again, can be supported with more anima powers to a point where you're just blindly running down hallways as this explosive beast, not even knowing when you're hitting enemies because you can't see, and by the time it's all over, you're surrounded by corpses and loot. The last is the Beasts of Prodigum, where you choose one of these 3 little death beasts to follow you around and do stuff. Anima powers don't buff you, but they buff the pets, making them even more powerful, to the point where you just kind of run in and let the pet raise everything to the ground in a glorious tapestry of gore. Fun. The biggest story this week is, of course, that game director Ian Hazzikostas lied on stream because he has a fetish for having his words turned into a hashtag and then being spanked in the butt with said hashtag. The other day, Ian posted a big old Shadowlands post that addressed the greatest hits of the beta so far, except conduits. Stay tuned for that horror show, but even without that, there's a lot of meat to it. I went through and read the whole thing. I'm going to provide a link to that video in the description below, but I'm going to give you the highlights and a few follow-up concerns. First, among my favorites, concerning gem sockets. Sockets in Shadowlands are going to be limited to 6 equipment slots: helmets, 2 rings, necks, bracers, and belts. They can appear in one of 2 ways. They can proc like a tertiary stat, like RNG OMG, but gear can also be socketed with an item that can be bought by farming the Maw. So there you have it, folks, the reason to visit the Maw and save the countless victims that are suffering under the rule of the jailer, to get gem sockets. But I love this approach. This is what RNG in WoW ought to be, in my opinion. As in, maybe you'll get lucky and get this thing ahead of time, but if you're not that lucky, there is a path to get there. 6 slots is limited, but 6 slots so far feels like a reasonable balance considering how long it might take to buy 6 of these socketing thingamajiggers. It's a little bit much to feel compelled to grind out more gear slots like you can in BFA 8.3, but you might disagree. PvP itemization also got a big win this week, even if it's just words, but words are nice too, right? Blizzard acknowledged that the lack of stat variety sucks, so that's going to be addressed somehow, some way. What many vocal players have expressed is the desire for a PvP specific stat. PvP power or resilience comes to mind. I'd love to get some specific input from you PvP pros or PvPP. Which change do you prefer? Because I have some small concerns about what players would like versus what is easiest to implement. Personally, I think a PvP set bonus is the fastest thing to throw in that respects PvP gear farming and gives a reasonable advantage over players with no PvP gear. I'm not going to get into specifics, but something like a 2-piece bonus that makes you take less damage from players. 4-piece bonus will make you deal more damage, a 6-piece bonus will give some sort of anti-crowd control benefit, and 8 will, I don't know, like a dampening effect or healing reduction, something like that. I think that's much cleaner and easier to understand than a resilience stat to tune, but again, I would love to hear your input. You guys are the experts. Alt Game Plus now has a choice option with respect to getting more hands-on experience with Covenant abilities than a target dummy can give you. Now, alts who do enter the Shadowlands can opt to do the standard level experience and go through the motions just like on their main, but at any time they can talk to an NPC and skip the main questline altogether in favor of joining a Covenant earlier. Then they can go through a more open leveling experience of completing bonus objectives and daily content and world quests and dungeons and the etceteras. Not what players are asking for, which is to just be able to switch powers freely, but it's an okay compromise. Speaking of, we now have clarifications on how switching covenants works. To switch to a new one, you just need to talk to an NPC in Orboz and ta-da, you're done. But to switch to one that you had previously left, here's the friction. You have 2 weekly quests to complete. And that's it. When you choose to rejoin, you're still in your current covenant, but once you complete all the requirements, you then slide back into your old family's good graces. More importantly though, Blizzard is doubling down on the theme of meaningful choice in Shadowlands, one that as usual I'm mixed over. The ripcord is rip. Personally, I'm fascinated by the opportunity to make this meaningful choice, knowing that in order to change, there's this 2-week commitment. A trifle for some, and a reason to roll class covenant combos for others. But I'm also not looking forward to the day when this meaningful choice that I made is going to be taken away because WoW is moving beyond Shadowlands and into the Cosmic Kitchen. And I'll be throwing on my artifact apron and earning apron power. It makes you question what's the real impact of this meaningful choice that will mean nothing after only a few years. But did Ian and Blizzard lie about this whole ripcord thing? Oh, it's easy to say yes, and it feels good to say it, doesn't it? Ooh, he lied. We caught him. The quote is out there, and, he's got all these retweets. He gaffed. He screwed up. You can call this me making an excuse for him. You can call it me defending him. I don't care, really. I see this as a speech flub from the guy who I think he's been a game designer longer than he's been a lawyer now, if I'm getting my facts right. But Ian should have just said something like, yes, there are options on the table to make this happen. There's a game plan that's not off the table. But saying there's a ripcord puts an assumption in listeners' heads that undoing this is easy, or it's like saying Blizzard has gone through this entire process of developing a collapsing switch that would unbuckle Covenant abilities. It would undo the relationship between that and Soulbinds. It would have this UI magically set up somewhere, and all of that would just be ready to go, with the development and the testing and the reiterating and the factoring in for the future. And that's despite conduits going through a massive shift, which was right after this whole ripcord gaffe was said. And during development, a lot of traits and abilities went through heavy revamps, with probably more on the way. Oh, but no, the ripcord is there. He said it. That's what my $15 a month paid for. Right. Anyone who thought that there was a figurative ripcord that would just make it all work is a bigger Blizzard defender than anyone would ever accuse me of. Oh, but he said it, Soul. There's the ripcord. Yes, he misspoke. That was a screw up. Someone should have told him to walk that back. but it didn't happen and people ran with it. I've said this numerous times, but there is in fact an easy-ish thing that Blizzard can do, and it's about that whole 2 weekly quest requirement to switch back to a previously left covenant. Lift that, and we at least get the chance to switch covenant whenever we like, which is arguably not what these fans are asking for, and of course is subject to all sorts of other critiques and problems. As hot button of a topic this is, I'm really worried that so much attention is being diverted here that not enough is being given to other very important parts of Shadowlands. Now I get it, how you tailor your class to content, that's class design, it's extremely important. Covenants are tied to class design, covenants are extremely important. Easy logic. But there are important subjects that I want to try and put more focus on as we get closer to launch, because frankly, I think all that's been said about covenants has been said. All that's left now is to see how the tuning of covenant abilities goes. First, Torghast. One part of it is a player progression system with 6 floors, 8 difficulties, and a weekly routine to farm for legendary materials. Maybe you'll hate the chore, but it's probably not because of a lack of trying on Blizzard's part. There's some pretty amazing moments. Torghast is also one part casual endgame, 18 floors, 8 difficulties, and a goal to clear it for cosmetics and mounts and who knows what. But as it stands right now, it's not enough. Earlier in the week, I talked about anima and how that makes up a big part of Shadowlands' casual endgame. But that eventually comes to an end. All the progression bars are maxed out, all the transmog is earned, and that's that. Torghast absolutely needs an optional challenge to let participants enjoy the fruits of their labors in the dungeon, gathering powers and creating ridiculous builds, and then, again, optionally, see how far it can take them. Pure content, a thing to do, no need for rewards, unlike other systems like corruption or essences, which were things to farm for. Speaking of things to farm for, conduits. Conduits were suspiciously absent from this week's post from Ian, which tells me that there might still be discussion going on. Conduit switching still has a cooldown that affects everybody, from people who are experimenting, to mistakenly adding the spec-specific conduit to what is supposed to be the more versatile soulbind, to those 5 druids who are full-time tanks, and healers, and ranged, and melee DPS, and do PvP, and arena, and Mythic Plus. This is one of those moments where a change affects too many of the wrong people. So I suggest, instead of a 7-day cooldown on switching out these conduits, let's have a 3-day cooldown. But on top of that, let's add 5 or so charges, so that way if that one druid needs to do a big overhaul, they can do it, at least up to a certain point. Meanwhile, most everyone isn't going to notice doing the occasional switch if they do it at all. I think that's simple and elegant, and it may or may not be listened to, so here's your call to action, folks. Spread this idea around. I'm sure that having no friction on switching conduits would be great too, but for now let's work on getting Blizzard to be on board with a compromise. As for conduit upgrades, I've wrestled with this idea for weeks, and unfortunately this is one of those rare moments where I don't see a compromise. I don't see an elegant solution for upgrading 20 or so conduits per class across, these 15 item level brackets that have been data mined on Wowhead? So mark my words. If and when upgrades come to conduits, and if we end up having to power them up individually, it will immediately overshadow Covenant choice as, the big problem in Shadowlands. Because then conduits will be a thing that we have or that we're pressured to do, and it will take up way too much of our time. The only thing that I can offer really is that for conduit upgrades, they should be uniform and class-wide. All conduits will level up from 155 to 160 to 165 and so on and so forth. If you get a new conduit, cool, it just happens to match the item level of the rest. Which is why I would be totally cool if conduits were a passive upgrade system that was tied to renown. So for example, at renown level 40, everyone's conduit power or conduit item level had upgraded 5 times. And in the next season, with additional renown ranks, because I'm sure that's going to be a thing, we'll have 5 more conduit upgrades. But these are just ideas, and I don't even have time to talk about the maw, because I decided that. That's the show. Haha. So this week has been a really personal roller coaster for me. The Ardent Wield cinematic totally caught me off guard, and to be honest, it's affected how I ended up writing this weekly. Not to worry though, before you know it, I'll be back in step, ready to talk about the Maw, and conduits, and Torghast, and the other big components of Shadowlands that I think are important, that I want to convince you that they are important. Because they are. Anyway, let's get out of here so I can play some Torghast, alright? So please like this video if you enjoyed yourself today and subscribe for more of this and all things Warcraft. We'll see you next time. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.